What's up, YouTube? So, today I'm going to be as objective and as fair as I possibly can and give a review of the movie Batman versus Superman. And I know it's an old movie, or it's not really an old movie, but this movie came out a while ago. This is my first movie review, so I figured why not let me do a relatively recent movie before I start jumping into newer movies while I guess getting into the whole movie review thing. So I'll be upfront and I'll be as honest as anyone can get at the get go. So I'm not really a DC fan, and I've always been on the side of Marvel since I was a kid. Um, I am, however, an overall comic book and superhero fan, and I recently have been getting into DC ever since the Nolan Dark Knight films kind of came out, and I began to start reading some DC titles and doing research to start learning about the characters. I did this not because the Nolan films were these off-field, inspiring movies, but because from what little I did know about Batman, I knew that Nolan's Batman was not Batman. And so I did some research on him to confirm my beliefs. So I started watching some of the DC animated films because Marvel, their films they're just trash, and I became hooked on them, and I had to learn more and more and more about this DC universe. Eventually, you look at it. I mean, Flash is starting to become more and more one of my favorite comic characters. Of course, behind Spider-Man and Wolverine, but he's coming close to beating them out due to what I would say, the poor depiction of these characters in the live action cinematic universe. And as much as I love Wolverine, I'm tired of him being the focal point of every single film that he's in. And I'm by no means an expert on Batman and Superman, but I know enough to be able to kind of chime in on this movie. So, in giving a review of my style, we're going to look at certain viewpoints, and we're going to look at the plot. We're going to look at the visuals. We're going to look at the score and the characters, and then I'm just going to give an overall viewpoint of the movie, and then my final score. So, let's look at the plot. We'll break it down. We'll break down the movie and sum it up. All right, so some stuff happens, and then some other stuff happens, and some other stuff, and then Bruce Wayne kind of steps in every once in a while, and then, some other stuff happens. That's kind of the way that I feel about the plot, and there wasn't really a lot of organization to the plot. It was probably one of the most criticized thing in the story. There's a lot of plot holes, a lot of things that didn't make sense. The storytelling overall, it just wasn't very good. Now I know that people will then say, if you look at the director's cut, the extended cut, then a lot of those holes are kind of plugged up. And to be honest, I haven't seen it, so I can't really say much about it. That's why I'm reviewing the theatrical cut. But the plot, overall was shoddy at best. And I would give just the plot alone. I would give the plot a C minus just because it had too many holes. It jumped around from scene to scene, and it didn't really lend itself to, I guess, a cohesive story that connected the world of Superman and Batman together. I didn't feel like I was getting to learn about these characters, and we already had, yes, a story for Superman or the Man of Steel, But for Batman, I don't feel like we learned that they did any kind of good storytelling to tell us about who Batman is or any other character in the story. So the plot overall, I feel like, was shoddy at best, and they did not do a good job giving us a good story. Regardless, we're not talking about how it matches up with the characters, um, with the integrity of the characters. Just overall, the story did not come out.
All right, so let's look at visuals. Now, honestly, the visuals were stunning. Now, everything, for the most part, that was on the screen was beautiful. I feel the CGI was done well, and it was relatively believable, except in the case of Doomsday. Now, Doomsday looked pretty bad, and not the CGI. It wasn't the CGI issue. It was just it looked nothing like Doomsday. He looked like a big mess compared to what Doomsday actually looked like. The tone of the visuals, um, it was very dark, but I didn't have a problem with that. I don't feel like that took away from the movie. The quote unquote storyline fit a dark feel that you could tell that they were going for, and I could tell that's where they were going, and I feel like they did it pretty nicely. They took it there really well. I wanted to give a grade of an A minus for the visuals, but I'm not going to give them an A minus. I'm actually going to give them a B minus. I'm taking a whole grade away, and the reason why I'm taking this grade away from them is because of what they did to Doomsday. And I, for one, am tired of not and it's not just with DC movies, but it's also with Marvel movies, where the depiction of a villain looks like trash. It looks horrible. It's like there's no respect at all for the villain. And I know they're the bad guy, and you're supposed to be rooting for the good guy, but have some respect. That's why I know a lot of people have issues with the villains. And when while we're watching a movie, if the villain is not respected well, if we don't fear the villain, if we don't have, if there's no respect for the villain, then the movie is not going to have any respect. You're going to look at the hero as not a true hero. They're not going to be put on a pedestal or raised to a certain, I guess, level of height because of who they're fighting against. So I think that Warner Brothers and Marvel Studios, they need to get it together when it comes to making or the way that they present their villain on screen, because this is just unacceptable. And we'll talk more later. I know it's a simple CGI issue, and you can't really have Doomsday in live action, as far as I know. But the CGI work, it was pretty ridiculous as far as the way that he looked and compared to how he actually looked. And I, for one, am tired of the creative license that movie makers are taking when they're putting these adapted characters on screen. I mean, these characters were popular for a reason. They became, who they were for a reason. But I think we need to respect, what made them popular, not decide to change what we want. What a director or a writer wants to change about them. So I felt like they could have kept that. So because of that, and I know that's all, relatively may seem picky, but I am going to kind of tear them down or take them down to a B minus, because that this is just getting ridiculous of what they're doing as far as the way that they portray these villains, and because it was tied in to the visuals through CGI. I feel like I gotta stick them hard. So if anyone who's making um, this is a message to the movie makers that you need to start respecting the characters, and especially the villains, as well as the characters, but specifically the villains is where you guys are just saying we just don't care, and it feels like the effort is not even there at all. Okay, now let's switch to soundtrack. Now, honestly, I'm going to come out and expose myself in this regard that when it comes to soundtrack, I don't care at all about it. Like I said, I don't care at all about the soundtrack of any movie. And this movie, I don't really remember anything about the soundtrack except for I noticed when I heard the music that was playing for Wonder Woman when she came on screen. I did pick that up, but nothing else really stuck out. And it's not that the soundtrack doesn't matter, but to me, soundtrack is accidental. It's an accidental benefit. It can improve the film, but I feel like it does at a subconscious level, at least with me. If it works, and it pulls me deeper into the scene. If it doesn't, where it's a case like in The Amazing Spider-Man, where he's putting the stuff on the board and they're playing the "For You," that was horrible. I thought that was I could tell while I was watching that just doesn't sound right in this movie. Soundtrack basically doesn't mean anything to me, and so you'll never hear me discuss soundtrack again. So I can't give a score for the soundtrack because I don't even remember anything about the soundtrack. Okay, now let's switch over to the acting of the film. Now I'm going to start out with the best acting jobs and the character portrayals first. Um, so I'm going to mention, those characters and those roles that I felt brought the most to the film to lend its best to the storyline of this movie. And then I'm going to discuss the roles that I feel needed a lot of work. All right, so first, the little girl at the beginning of the movie in Metropolis, where Zod is fighting Superman or the Man of Steel, and he goes. Batman sees the little girl, or Bruce Wayne saves the little girl, and she's looking for her mommy. Now, this girl, she embodies what what you would see in a comic book movie where there's a little girl and she's helpless. And I felt like this girl, she played that role hard. She did whatever she could. I could feel her sense of confusion, that pain of feeling lost in her performance. I feel like she did an excellent, great job. Next in line is Bat number 10. So as when little Bruce was running and he falls into the hole and into the Bat cave, and then you see the bats fly out and encircle him, and then he begins to float up. The 10th bat that rushes towards Bruce did a phenomenal job. Phenomenal job. And I felt like that bat embodied bats. And I could tell just the portrayal, the work. You could tell that this particular bat, worked on his scenes, worked on its flying, the way he flapped his wings, and the look on his face. I could just see the terror. And I believe that this was a recurring nightmare that Bruce Wayne had been having for a long time. And that bat number 10, really made me feel it. All right, so now let's look at the rest of the rest of the roles and the rest of the actors in the film. Of course, I'm being a little sarcastic and tongue in cheek, and it's for a reason. But first we'll look at some of the characters. We'll look at Jeremy Irons.
So Jeremy Irons as Alfred. I feel like he did a good job in his role. Was he classic father figure, mentor Alfred? No, but I didn't think his different take on Alfred took away from the character or the personality of Alfred. I actually like seeing Alfred kind of take more of a hands-on approach in his assistant's role with Batman. Now, as I said before, I'm not an expert in Batman, so maybe the reason why I don't have an issue is because I don't really know all of the ways that Alfred has been written into the story, into the lore. So seeing him in this capacity, even though he's not in his most most presented way, I still felt like he did well for what he did. When I saw him on the screen, I didn't feel a roll in the eyes kind of role. I felt like what's the guy's name from the Dark Knight series, Michael Caine. At sometimes I got annoyed with Michael Caine, and especially in the Dark Knight Rises, where he basically leaves Bruce Wayne. I felt like that it was something that's completely it was a refreshing thing to see that even though he was frustrated and kind of the things that Bruce Wayne was doing, um, it was he didn't leave. He had that loyalty to Bruce Wayne and Batman and to what they had been doing as far as fighting crime. Now, I don't really want to comment too much on Laurence Fishburne as Perry White because of their his part in the film was so small. I will say that his believability was stripped away due to the poor writing in this film. For the fact that Perry White just walks into the office and just starts assigning stories to random reporters. Um, when there's companies that have special departments for a reason. Their reporters are considered to be experts in their fields. So I didn't believe him as, this, someone who's, the editor in chief, the person who runs a, huge newspaper company. Also, I can understand Lois arguing with Perry White about her assignment and that their focus should have been somewhere, but Clark was just flat out insubordinate, and he should have been fired for not doing what his boss assigned him to do. Now, I'm sure Perry White, I would believe that Perry White was glad when Clark died because now he can go out and he can hire a reporter who actually does what his boss wants him to do. Now let's look at Amy Adams as Lois Lane. Now, I don't want to spend too much about her either, and the reason why is because I feel like she played the part as they wrote it for her. But like in The Man of Steel, Lois pretty much existed in the film only to just be a walking plot hole device, or she was pretty much a plot hole plug. I thought that Lois Lane or Amy Adams, I can't complain about seeing her in the film. I felt like her history, the history of Lois Lane, was not really utilized, or it wasn't really portrayed in, I guess, true Superman fashion. And because of this, we see Amy Adams or we see Lois Lane basically just being a hindrance in the film. She's put into different situations so things can happen, but she doesn't really add much to the characters. She doesn't add much to Clark Kent or to Superman, And so we don't really feel we never really see why he cares about her so much. In the Man of Steel, it's not really there. And from the beginning of Batman versus Superman, from what we see that's happened with them, we still don't see this connection on why they should be so close. Why does Superman care so much for Lois Lane? It's not there. And I feel like they cheated us on that. Now, anytime Amy Adams is in, on the screen, I think is a good thing. I think she's a gorgeous woman, and I've always had a thing for redheads, so I like seeing her on the screen. So I don't feel like her actual portrayal, even though I feel like she still doesn't embody the attitude or the charisma that Lois Lane has. It's unfortunate that it's unfortunate of the lack of effort that studios seem to do when it comes to hiring people and the type of role that they want them to play. I think Margot Kidder did an excellent job. I see Lois Lane as the portrayal as Margot Kidder, and um, I know there can be different versions or different variations on ways that this character was portrayed, but I don't think they gave Amy Adams enough, um, good, serious, meaningful screen time in order to develop a Lois Lane where she is Lois Lane. I think we just have a reporter who is a female who happens to be named Lois Lane that is in a relationship with Superman slash Clark Kent, but we still don't have a Lois Lane. So even though it's really great to be able to look at Amy Adams on the screen, I still don't feel like she embodied the essence of who Lois Lane is. And I don't think that it was really Amy Adams' fault. I think it was a script issue, and I think it was a director issue where they did not allow her to be Lois Lane. Henry Cavill as the Man of Steel, as Superman. I honestly did not like Man of Steel very much at all. I didn't like it at all. I thought it was trash. But but I didn't like it because of Henry Cavill's portrayal of Superman and Clark Kent. It wasn't his acting that really did it for me, or maybe it was. I don't know. It depends on how Henry Cavill is for an actor in general. I've never seen him anything else, so I don't know how. I don't know if it's just that's just the way that he acts, or if this was the direction that he was given. But it was more so because of the story itself and the way that he was written in the story. Um, but if we look at the Man of Steel, in the Man of Steel's Cavill, Clark and Superman, they came off as dull, really dull. And when either of those characters were on the screen, I never was excited to see them. There was nothing in the movie that made me, you know, care that there was a difference between Clark Kent and Superman. They don't flesh out him as Clark Kent, and the way that he's written as Superman is so spotty that you don't really care. It's boring. And I know it's not good to compare, movies, but let's look at Iron Man. Now, when Iron Man is on screen, when I watched the first Iron Man, the second Iron Man, even the third Iron Man, as bad as that was, I was excited to see Stark when he was in the suit. When he put on that suit, I was excited to see him. I was excited to see what he did. And I can't stand Iron Man. I hate Iron Man. I was never a fan of Iron Man. I'm still not a fan of Iron Man. But when he's on screen, I love to see it. And when it's just Tony Stark, his charisma is enough to keep you into what's going on. it doesn't make you say, "Ah, man, it's Tony Stark. Let's get to Iron Man." That's not how it was. And this didn't come out in Henry Cavill's portrayal of Superman. And because it's a Superman film or a Superman and Batman film, we should feel that. Anytime Superman is on screen, we should be excited. But that's not how I felt. I just felt like I just want to know what's going to happen next, and that's sad because this is his film, and we're not excited to really see him. Okay, now Ben Affleck as Batman and Bruce Wayne. Now Affleck, he was decent in his role as Batman. He tried to kill the part. He did. He tried to kill the part, which is ironic because Batman was trying to kill everything else in the movie. And when I think about the way that Bruce Wayne acts, it was played out in Affleck's portrayal. When I think about the way that Batman fights, it was also played out in this particular Batman's portrayal. The problem with Batman and Bruce Wayne was in the writing. And I don't understand why, but it seems as if they are making Batman dumber and dumber in each imagining of this character. For about 2 years in the movie Batman vs Superman, for about 2 years, Bruce that he had to hate Superman in his quote unquote detective work. He should have realized that Superman was not a threat to the world, and that his resume of doing good deeds for 2 years should have counted for something. The fact that there was no attempt to talk to Superman to see what his intentions were, it shows that there's a problem with this writing, with the ideals. The only research that was really done was to figure out that the kryptonite could hurt Kryptonians. And he figured out where he could have found some kryptonite. Batman's whole motivation to kill Superman was driven by basically his salty feelings. It seemed like his salty feelings about his building being destroyed and people who worked for him being killed. Even though it wasn't an intentional act by Superman alone. The Batman versus Superman angle was basically like it was a revenge plot. And there's nothing in this movie that suggests that killing Superman was necessary because there was no other option. We did not see a Batman that needed to have killed him. And in a world where Batman is considered to be the world's greatest detective, we see that Christopher Nolan's name is attached to it, but we see Zack Snyder and the writers have no respect for the superior intellect that this character has. And because he is supposed to be, in the DC universe, the world's greatest detective. But ironically, the only real detective work that we see in this movie was sadly done by Lois Lane. And the whole Bullet subplot took more research figuring out where it came from than anything else. So the writing, Ben Affleck did a good job for what he did with Batman and Bruce Wayne. But the writers it feels like they're trying to destroy the legacy of Batman. Because what makes Batman who he is, and what makes him so great, is because he's so smart and because he's such a good fighter. I've always said that, as I mentioned, I did not like the Christopher Nolan Batman series. I thought it was horrible. I didn't feel like that was Batman. It's not. And the reason why is because we don't see the great detective work, and we didn't see the superior fighting style. He's one of the best hand-to-hand combatants in the DC universe as well as the greatest detective. And in the Dark Knight trilogy, we don't see that. I thought he was, I thought his fighting was lackluster and very boring. Boring. So I think in Batman versus Superman, I thought the fight scenes were they were awesome. When I saw the trailer and I saw the fight scene in the where he's throwing the crates and slamming people in the crates, and I was like, finally, Batman, the way that Batman fights. That's the way that I felt. But unfortunately, the superior detective skills wasn't there. He was a dumb Batman, a dumb character. And I wish that we could have seen that, but they did not portray that in the film. Now, Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, and I'm probably going to get lynched for my opinion on her. Some people say that she was awesome, and I think she was just okay, in my opinion. For her part in Batman vs. Superman, she played the part written for her as well. And as a supporting character, she would fit really well. I still think she was too small and too thin. And when the movie comes out on video, I can be able to, well, it's already out, but when I get to watch it, I can focus on the fine details. But I remember as I was watching the movie the first time in theaters, that there were parts where it looked like her bulk, like some of the bulk that she did have, it kind of looked like it was CGI'd in. And I don't even know if you can even do that, but I don't know, it just looked kind of weird. And my biggest concern with her is for Wonder Woman in the future, in her standalone film. I've never seen Gal Gadot in a movie before. I've never seen her, never saw any of the Fast and Furious movies. So I don't really know her acting ability. But unless she's going to be spending the entire Wonder Woman or Justice League movie just walking around looking sexy and mysterious, I'm not sure that she could sustain the lead of her own movie. She seemed kind of bland, like the movie overall felt, until she was on the screen as Wonder Woman. Then I think it became a little bit exciting. When Wonder Woman was on the screen, it was lively, and it was probably she was probably the only one in the film that probably experienced any kind of joy. I think the only smile came from her as she was fighting Doomsday. But her as Diana Prince, I don't know. I don't think that she's got the acting chops to pull off her own movie as the lead. And I might be wrong. But from what we saw and from her limited resume, I worry about her and in the future for being Wonder Woman. Okay, and now we'll get to the elephant in the room, which is Alexander Luthor Jr. I honestly don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. Did Jesse do a bad job with the Lex character? Now, I know before the release of the film, I knew that he was supposed to be Lex's son. So for him to not be like Lex normally is, I get it. So for a character that is not Lex Luthor, Jesse Eisenberg played a good comic booky kind of villain that was evil and had a plan to destroy, I guess, the story's hero. Although there was no clear reason or motivation for this, there was no bigger picture in the grand scheme of things. There are lots of people that saw this movie that don't keep up with updated news when a film is coming out or is releasing. So some people did not know that this was supposed to be Lex Luthor's son. And when they got to the movies, I'm sure they were probably scratching their heads like, what in the world is this? This is not Lex Luthor. And the way that it was portrayed was that it was Lex Luthor. And if Warner Brother wanted to create a brand new villain for the story and casted Jesse Eisenberg to play that part, that the specific part that he did, or they chose another character that Jesse's portrayal would have fit the part, then I would have had no problem with it. But I'm sorry, some people, when you tell them, hey, I'm going to give you steak, they're going to show up expecting steak. And then they're going to get pissed off when you give them turkey loaf, but you just call it steak. And then you'll have the audacity to say, well, I just wanted to show you a different take on steak. Because of this shoddy portrayal, this was not good. And this goes along with what I said about villains at the beginning. And I'm fed up with it. But this portrayal of Lex Luthor, whether it be his son or not, was not okay. It wasn't. And there were a lot of people that were showing up to see Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor. And why can't you just show us? Why can't you just give us Lex Luthor? Who asked for Lex Luthor's son? What person said, you know what, I want to see a movie where we can have Lex Luthor's son, who really, I mean, it doesn't really exist, but was in one particular story. Why can't you just give us the characters the way that they were written, the way that they were created? Stop creating your own take on a character. And don't play this little switcheroo thing that you do where where you do throw in a character who really doesn't, I mean, he exists in a comic story arc, but it was in one issue, a couple of issues, one or two issues, if even that. It's unacceptable. And Lex Luthor, I feel like, establishes the respect that Zack Snyder and the writers have for this property. And this was a shoddy portrayal. It was a poor portrayal. And because of this shoddy portrayal and the disrespect to the source material and the fans, I give a grade for the character portrayals and slash acting, I give them an F. And for a tip, I'm also going to give it a U.
Now, evaluating the plot of the movie, as I described the film at the beginning of my review, I said some stuff like, some stuff happens, and then something else happens, and then some other stuff happens. And I feel like this movie was very poorly written, and I believe a lot of people feel exactly the same way. There's bad pacing, there's a lot of unanswered questions, plot holes galore, fan service that only exists to play the Justice League film up, but doesn't drive the plot along. And, overall, the plot is just lacking. And I understand that there are a lot of questions in the new extended cut. There are a lot of things that are kind of answered, but that's still no excuse. Number one, I'm only reviewing the theatrical review, but still, even though I haven't seen the extended cut, I have not seen it yet to be able to say that it still lends to a fully formed plot. The story was just poorly written. From a movie standpoint and from a comic book standpoint. So I would have to say from a from a film standpoint, I would have to grade the plot as a C.
So let's look at giving this movie a final score, a final grade, and pretty much looking overall, kind of tying all of this into the plot of the movie, the overall quality of the story, its visuals, the character portrayal versus slash acting. And I'm going to have to overall just give this movie. It's gonna end up with a grade of a C, a solid C. And the reason why is for everything that we talked about before, I feel like it was let down in the department of the character portrayals and the visualization in certain characters. And there are some good things about the movie. It's not a complete wash, but the things that I feel like that were let down, I think they were big enough to keep this movie from being a good solid B or even an A. But even though there are some good qualities in this movie, I feel like that it overall has got to take a hit. And it takes that hit because of the portrayal and the way that these characters have been imagined and represented on the big screen. And I think that as long as these directors and these writers are taking these liberties to change these characters up and these properties the way that they're doing, then I feel like that you're going to continue to have these different problems and these uneven reviews for the movie, because you've got people who love who love these properties and they love these characters, and they're going to go watch these movies no matter what, no matter what. And the people who you really have to convince are the people who don't care anything about it. And they're probably just going to go watch these movies based off of name recognition alone. They probably heard of these people, but they have no clue about anything about them. So, these characters became popular and famous for a reason. Stick with that. Don't decide to make these changes just because you think that they might be better. Because if you are a diehard fan or if you're a fanboy, then you're probably not going to think that those changes are going to be good. Now, if you're a fanboy, you're going to like it regardless. But if you're a fan and you value what these characters are and what they stand for and their history, then you might have a little bit of problem with these things. So, why not just don't piss off the fans who really truly care about these properties, and give the people who don't know anything about these properties a good story. So think about that. Now, would I recommend that you go see this movie in the theaters? Yeah, it depends on you. This is a superhero movie. And at the end of the day, it is always a good thing to be able to see these characters on live action on the big screen. And that's the redeeming quality that this movie has. As bad as it was and the flaws that it had, that's one thing that you can't forget. And to go see the movie in the theaters, it's an experience. Now, I definitely don't think it is a theater ticket. And if you need that experience, if that's something that you feel like you're losing out, then I definitely would say spend the few extra dollars compared to a Redbox and watch it on matinee. But as far as paying full price, I don't see it. I wouldn't recommend it. And if seeing it in the theaters is not important to you, then wait till it comes out on video or on demand, a digital download, and then watch it then. All right, and on that note, I'm going to end this review here. Thank you for listening and for tuning in. This is Logan Oren, the Troll for Truth, because the truth should mean something, even when it comes to movies.